Okay, hi everybody. My name is Kyle Yakishiro. I'm the treasurer on the board of directors. Sorry, I'm just gonna move some screens here. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so my name is Kyle Yakishiro. I'm a treasurer on the board of directors for Powell Street Festival Society. I'm I'm a Yonsei, fourth generation Japanese Canadian, mixed European settler as well. I'm of indigenous heritage, as my mom is half Cree as well. So while we meet today virtually, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land and its keepers. I'm currently speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. It's an honor and a privilege to learn from and with the communities of these lands and waters. As someone born and raised in BC, with both Japanese Canadian and indigenous ancestry, being involved in this community has been a huge learning experience and an opportunity for me to integrate parts of myself previously unknown. And our work in the Downtown East Side is especially important to me as it touches on many aspects of my cultural identity and is also emblematic of the struggles happening all over the world. The bravery, resilience, and wisdom of elders and knowledge keepers continues to inspire me and greatly shapes my understanding of community. So today we're talking about mental health. The speakers today will share insight into their experience with healing through art. I ask participants to be active, generous listeners and storytellers to value everyone's perspective. And especially given the topic with this round, ask participants to be kind and generous with themselves. So thank you for coming on this journey with us as we explore complexities of our identities and responsibilities and interconnectedness. This series is possible thanks to financial support from HAPA Collaborative, SFU's David Lamb Center, Canadian Council for the Arts, BC Arts Council, City of Vancouver, individual donors, and in-kind support from the Bulletin Magazine and Element IQ. Just some standard housekeeping notes before we get started. We are recording the guest presentations and these will be available on Powell Street's YouTube channel. You can turn off your camera if you wish to remain private. There is a Q&A right after the panelist presentation. Please write your questions in the chat box. Also, I want to stress our priority today is to hear from everybody during the breakout groups. We are inviting you into a circle, but we have contextual and technological constraints. So we asked the facilitators in each group to be a bit tough with time management. We apologize in advance. As participants, we ask you to be active, generous listeners, value everyone's perspective. Again, what's in here? Yeah, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest host today, Sue Arai. Sue Arai is a queer Sansei generation Japanese Canadian residing in Southern Ontario and engaging in change through the practices of psychotherapy, disability advocacy, and research. Take it away, Sue.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screens and open up my PowerPoint. Okay, is everybody able to see that? Maybe just give someone, thank you, great. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everybody. So happy to see everyone here and thank you for taking the time out of your Saturday to be here. Maybe just before we begin, as we all land in this space together, I just would like to take the opportunity to invite you to feel the seat that you're sitting in and just feel the chair and the ground supporting you. Just take a moment to take any of those things that are in your mind and maybe just set them in a space beside you. They'll be there for you to pick up when we're done in a few hours. And then just invite you to be here right now with the magic that happens when we are present with each other in a really generous way. I join you today from my home in Waterloo, Ontario, within the 10-kilometer area surrounding the Grand River, known as the Haldimand Tract. This is the land granted to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. I deeply appreciate the honor of hosting the 7th Paueru Gai Dialogue on intergenerational trauma, resilience, mental health, and art. To set the context for our conversation, I want to speak a little bit about the Paueru Gai Dialogues. Paueru Gai refers to the Powell Street area in North Strathcona, Vancouver. This is the area that has seen the ebb and flow of Japanese Canadian culture since the late 19th century. Following relocation during the Second World War, many Japanese Canadians, like my immediate family, did not return to the area. But for 40 years, the Powell Street Festival Society has been creating a space to gather. One time I asked my cousin Kathy Shimizu about her involvement in the Powell Street Festival Society and community organizing. And she joked that she just keeps inviting people and to come and hoping that at some point they'll eventually take her up on the offer. Well, Kathy, it works. And my involvement here today is a testament to that, as well as our many cousins. I deeply appreciate the vision and approach of the Powell Street Festival Society, and these dialogues are only one innovative aspect of their efforts. The Paueru Gai Dialogues are a series of 9 online events in which BIPOC artists and activists share their perspective on current social issues to inspire civic engagement and community building during the disruption of this global health crisis. At a time when our ability to gather has been restricted and we see a widening gap between privileged and marginalized populations, the dialogues were born as a way for conversation, inspiration, and activism to continue. What I have deeply appreciated about these dialogues is the generous, engaging, and accessible way in which they have created space for us all to gather, to challenge modern thought, and to be engaged by the various presenters in a really postmodern way. That is, to expand and shift our perspectives and to be inspired by how art and performance help us to find a new way forward. And in so doing, revealing hope and possibilities. Today's Paueru Gai Dialogue offers possibility to open to new ways of knowing and understanding that engages our bodies, our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. Possibility to dialogue across cultures, geographies, generations, and different ways of knowing. Possibility to liberate art, healing ourselves and our various communities from the institutions that constrain our understanding and connection. Today's Paueru Gai Dialogue offers new narratives and possibilities for healing. To set a context for our 3 speakers, I've been asked to tell you a little bit about myself. My path to here has been anything but linear. And right about now, my cousins are probably nodding and chuckling to themselves. Like all good art, the lines, the words, the movements bend, they twist, they change direction, they unfold moment by moment. The same has been true of my life and my engagement in the economies of work. I'm a former social planner and consultant, a former associate professor in applied health sciences at Brock University and the University of Waterloo. I refer to myself as an academic survivor. I'm a disability advocate, and I currently have the privilege to sit each day with my clients as a registered psychotherapist. And as of maybe about half an hour ago, I'm also a certified sensory motor psychotherapist. Today, I'm your host for this panel, which is perhaps the joyful confluence of all of these paths. I just want to touch briefly on some of the projects that I came across as I journeyed on my path. Oh, I was supposed to show you this map. That's where Powell Street is. One of my projects that took place for over a decade, we referred to as Uncertain Futures. It was a research project that took place in a federal prison for women here in Ontario. We were exploring women's path to community reintegration following their incarceration. And what we encountered were stories after stories of what happens when marginalized folks are left to fall through the cracks of our institutions and systems. It's also a highly racialized system. We often refer to the racialized path to prison. This was a heartbreaking experience, and it culminated in a book in which we chronicled story after story of how women struggled to put together the basic determinants of health: housing, shelter, social support, work, following incarceration. At some point in that journey, the discomfort, the darkness was debilitating. And so as a researcher, myself and some of my colleagues began to take a bit of a creative shift. We began to explore how art might come into the prison and how we might explore bodies and experiences in a different way. And so these are some of the body maps that we engaged with the women. And then another turn that we took later on was we brought sound recording equipment into the prison, and women created poetry. They sang. We did mashups of their work. There were drum circles. We recorded a CD for them. Mothers could record themselves telling stories, children's stories, so that they could mail them home to their children. This project taught me a number of things. This project taught me to privilege the speaking communicating body. As Dwight Conkergood observed, traditionally the body and the flesh are linked with the irrational, the unruly, and the dangerous. And through art and performance, we attempted to both mobilize and challenge this understanding. This project taught me to attune to markers and cultural maps on the body. This project taught me that art brings immediacy, involvement, and intimacy, where traditional research created gaps and distances. This project taught me to take risks, to break codified patterns. This project taught me that healing requires us. No, it necessitates us to sit with discomfort and find a way to move and to sing and to dance with it. From there, I was asked by Carrie Gregg, who's also in the audience, to do a workshop with LGBTQ youth. And so we took our sound and recording equipment into schools and worked with the gay straight alliances in those schools. In a day-long workshop, we worked with the students to create spoken word poetry about their experiences of homophobia, of community, about their identities and their strengths. They performed these spoken word pieces, we recorded them, and then what we did is we played them back in a mashup. So we would play back 2 tracks at a time, like maybe their experiences of homophobia and the track about their experiences of their own strengths and identities. And then we would shift the volume on each of the tracks, turning down the voices of homophobia so their voices could be elevated. And in that, I heard one student, I learned so much from these students. Sky said to us, "We may never get rid of those voices in my head, but at least they become quieter when the others turned up." In healing, these students taught me that we need to risk ourselves to be moved and to move. Healing draws on our strengths, our resiliencies, and our resources as we get curious about fragments, silences, gaps, stuck places, and pain in and all around us. In healing, we confront the stories we tell of our lives and that others tell of our lives. We confront the containers in which we live and locate ourselves in the world, and we have the opportunity to make and break those containers. Healing often calls us to sit in discomfort, as we grapple with lived experiences of trauma and intergenerational trauma. Art practices create spaces for healing as our stories are re-explored, re-understood, recreated. Restoring helps us to move up and forward. And in one final twist and turn on my journey, I had the opportunity to create a nonprofit organization that we called Sadie's Place for Innovative Inclusion, supporting adults with developmental disabilities to become artists and button makers and creators. And through this, we began to sell our buttons in community. We drew contracts from organizations such as theirs, from sports teams, from nonprofit organizations. We had these contracts to design the art and the buttons for sale in the community. We were then asked to become speakers in university and college classrooms, to hold a booth at community events. And in this, I learned the power of relationships, of what happens when we step aside and let some creative, innovative young minds get together and lead the path forward. I learned the power of what can happen when we bring people together in relationship, when we shift people from being the objects of care to the creators of art who engage in art making, and when we engage in conversation. I learned the power of art as a vehicle for transformation. And I learned the very large lesson that healing requires interconnection. It is not a solo journey. So much emotion. For today's Paueru Gai Dialogue on intergenerational trauma, mental health, and art, these are our three panelists. Leanne Toshiko Simpson, writer and educator. Jotika Chaudhary Samant, artist and expressive arts therapist. And River Blondin Burt, artist and medicine maker. Leanne, Jotika, and River will offer their stories, their insights, and their experiences of how they weave practices of art, healing, self, and community. I had the opportunity to connect with each of these panelists for the first time last week, and I wish I had met them 20 years ago. They each bring a depth of wisdom and insight, passion and enthusiasm for their practices, and a beautiful spark of light and energy that is a joy to be in the presence of. I deeply appreciate how each brings their craft into activism and community organizing. Not only do they refuse to live in the small boxes that society would impose on them, but they also sing, write, move with others to help inspire us to recraft the boxes and spaces in which we live. Sharing space with Leanne, Jotika, and River, I walk away feeling more spacious, more joyful, more open-hearted, and more energized. We invite you to hear their stories. We invite you to notice how their words, their stories, their sounds, their images land in your mind, in your hearts, and in your bodies. Notice what their stories evoke in you. A new thought, an emotion, a sensation, a new action. From this engaged listening, our speakers provide space for each of us to examine the individual and collective stories held in our bodies when there is movement inside. When something shifts or opens, there may be a feeling of discomfort. With great intention, the Powell Street Festival Society organizers, your panelists, are attuned to creating a safer space for your engagement. And they asked me to really encourage you, invite you to please take good care of yourself. Take a break if you need to, turn your camera off if you wish, and do not worry about offending anyone. We will hold space with and for you. We understand. As you feel the chair beneath you, perhaps maybe find an object that soothes and nurtures you. And if anyone requires it, we would like to provide an active listening space for folks should they feel they need support or become triggered during the Paueru Gai Dialogues today. If you wish to have a safe space to talk to someone and ground yourself, as it indicates there on the screen, please send a direct message in the chat to Dustin at the Powell Street Festival Society. And just type in the words, "I would like support," in the chat on your Zoom. And then our wonderful tech team behind the scenes in cyberspace will move you into a separate Zoom space where you will connect with a trained facilitator for that support. So with no further ado, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce you to our first panelist, Leanne Toshiko Simpson. Leanne is a mixed-race Yonsei writer and mental health educator from Scarborough, Ontario. Yonsei, meaning fourth-generation Japanese Canadian. She is an award-winning writer of many pieces, including short fiction, a romantic comedy, and she has a debut novel coming out with HarperCollins in 2023. Leanne is also a diversity fund advisor for the Bell Let's Talk campaign, a mental health initiative. She is an activist writer sharing her craft with diverse marginalized groups so that they may begin to find their voices and tell their own stories. One such space is Matashita, an intergenerational writing circle for Japanese Canadians. Leanne is a scholar and an educator and currently a doctoral student in social justice education at the University of Toronto. And so with that, I will turn the screen over to Leanne.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's lovely to be with you all. Just before we get started, I'd like to offer my gratitude to the Indigenous nations who have fostered a relationship and cared for the land we are on since time immemorial. Today, I'm writing from Tkaronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe. I've been thinking a lot about Alicia Elliott's A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, in which she kind of links the ways which colonialism and depression have stolen her language. And she writes, "I've heard people say that when you learn a people's language, you learn their culture. It tells you how they think of the world, how they experience it. That's why translation is so difficult. You have to take one way of seeing the world and translate it to another while still piecing the words together so they make sense." I was thinking about this quote and grounding the way I've begun to think about mental health and how the language that I had when I first started kind of learning about it is not the language that I hold now. I think I've moved through a lot of spaces. So whatever space that you are in understanding this, we are with you, and we are all kind of experiencing things differently, and that is okay. And we will find spaces to connect. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So I just have a quote from Kai Cheng Tom. I don't know if you've ever seen this book. This is the DSM-2. It's the Asian American edition. So if you're not familiar with the DSM, it's like the book that people are diagnosed with mental illness from. It's a very large and rather terrifying book, but the Asian American Literary Review put together this compilation from Asian American and Asian Canadian artists. And in that book, Kai Cheng Tom writes, mental health is the language of power, the power to exist within and sometimes define the conventions of sanity, normalcy, the status quo, capitalism, white heteropatriarchy. The corollary being that those of us who are mentally unhealthy, which is to say everyone at some point or another, are responsible for managing our illness in private, for our own failure to recover, for our inability to be and feel and do what is needed of us. And I will tell you, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 17. I was very young. And all of a sudden, my whole world was just this whirlwind of hospitals and doctors and medications and things that I wasn't supposed to do. In that space, I understood myself as being alone. I understood mental illness as being a medical issue only that I was kind of dealing with in my own bubble. And that has changed for me a lot over the years. So I'm going often through writing and teaching. So I'm going to take you a little bit through that journey. So first, regaining authorships, being able to engage with mad art and knowledge building, learning of kind of connecting race and madness in some of my writing exercises that I ran at a museum. And then Mata Ashta, which is the program that Sue very kindly mentioned earlier. So this picture was taken about 2 weeks before my last suicide attempt. I had gone off my medication again. I got really dressed up to tell my partner at the time that I had gone off my medication, which kind of tells you a little bit about kind of where I was at mentally. I don't look at this picture very often, but when I do, it reminds me that sometimes what you're looking at on the outside is not how you're feeling on the inside. And the more that I had moved through the medical system, the more that I felt like I was losing kind of that authorship over my own story. And so after being hospitalized in the winter of 2013 for major depression, I started writing, and I wrote with my fellow patients. I wrote to survive. I wrote to feel like I had some sort of control over the story. This is just a quick snap of a poem that I published with Prism about going back to visit my friend who I'd been hospitalized with during his second or third hospitalization. And I do really feel that moving through these spaces of illness, you do pick up this language. You learn to connect through metaphor. You learn to connect through what cannot be said. And so I find that a lot of my work really holds space for those moments. So not to take up too much time on that, but this is kind of what pushes my writing. And so I wrote on my own, but I wrote with people who I was kind of hospitalized with. And it brought us a kind of joy that we didn't often have between timed showers and getting our blood taken and getting tranquilized at night. It was a little bit of a hard time, I would say. But I feel very lucky to have had this experience, to wade through this wreckage of ordinary, as I say at the end of this poem. But doing it on my own, a couple years out of writing and being lucky enough to publish in a couple of places, I realized that this was something that would be even more meaningful if I could share with others. And so I started teaching inside psychiatric wards, and I came to join an organization known as Inkwell Workshops. This is a picture of us at one of our book launches. Every year we put together an incredible anthology of writing by self-identified mad writers, and we publish it and have a community reading. And it's been a very amazing experience. And whoops, I went the wrong way. Hold on a second. Oh, you have to click on the right side of the screen. This is good information to have. And I kind of think the main principles of doing this kind of work, everyone who teaches there has lived experience, and we really understand storytelling as witness. So our shared vulnerabilities being a strength that gives us mad perception, that drives our art making, our creation, and our connection forward. We also work with lived experience and trauma-informed frameworks. So we understand trauma not just as a psychiatric diagnosis, but as a response to injuries that are extremely common in our society, including the historical legacy and ongoing reality of colonization. So these are the kinds of things that move our circles past just individual interpretations of sickness and wellness into kind of a community model where we ask, how can we be well if we're experiencing daily racism? How can we be well when we are coming back from these histories of oppression? And so with that in mind, in spring of 2019, my mother and I went back to New Denver, where my grandmother lived during the internment. And we went to visit the Nikkei Internment Memorial Center. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend going. It was a very powerful experience, regardless of if you have direct connection to internment or not. It's just a really special place to go and reflect. And it was at that time that I had been asked to run a creative writing workshop at the Being Japanese Canadian exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum. And I will say straight up that I have a very complex relationship with museums. Some of my family stuff is in museums. Obviously, museums have also been historically places for like knowledge performance and colonialization. But what I did know that was that those spaces were there, and either I could leave them there or try and do something different inside them and challenge the way that some of the framing. So I went in and started teaching museum writing workshops with mad and racialized writers. And this is just a shot from my great uncle George Doy from Popoff in winter 1943, an interpretation by Stephen Minota of Ghost Town and Ladder to the Moon. And it made me kind of think about why I would want to be in a space that did not feel like it was for me necessarily, or for mad writers, for racialized folks, in order to do this work. And I'll bring you back to Obasan, which has been a guiding text for me over the years by Joy Kugawa. We grow where we are not seen. We flourish where we are not heard. The undergrowth of an the thick undergrowth of an unlikely planting. Where do we come from, Obasan? We come from cemeteries full of skeletons with wild roses in their grinning teeth. We come from our untold tales that wait for our telling. And this again is Popoff during the internment. This is a picture from the 80s, my grandmother and her sisters going back to find where they used to live and finding nothing. And this is my mother and I in 2019, standing in that same field where they've installed a plaque, and it does not feel like enough. And so when I go into these museums, I am not there just to tell a museum story. I am there to ask, why is this gallery framed this way? I'm there to bring in BIPOC contemporary authors who can offer different perspectives that are not canonized. And it was a very hard project that I did for about a year. And more recently, moving from that space, I've just been writing about this in my doctoral research because I want to think about how the Japanese Canadian internment is mapped over Japanese imperialism, is mapped over settler colonialism, and it's a lot to hold. So I'm sorry that I don't have all the solutions and answers yet, but Mata Ashta is a space that I was able to create with Sen Knut and Nico Koyanagi, and it is an intergenerational writing circle. We have folks age 18 to 86. We meet once a month on the first Saturday of the month, and we bring in a Japanese Canadian writer who talks a little bit about the work, and then we write together. And when we're writing for wellness in these spaces, it's not necessarily, do you have a diagnosis? Do you have a doctor's note? That's not really what it's about. It's about how has the legacy of internment, how has the legacy of the war, how has the legacy of being a settler on this land, how is all of this affecting the way that you think about your well-being? And so we've been lucky enough to publish our first collection of writing, launched at the Powell Street Festival in July, and we are starting season 2. I believe we're going to share the link in the chat. The second season begins in October, so just in a few weeks. We're launching with Genki Ferguson's Satellite Love, which is a very, very cool book. And it's the kind of community that I never really thought I would have. I think I used to keep race and I used to keep disability very separated. And that's just not the way that it kind of has come together over the last couple of years. So when I think about wellness, it has become so much more, and it's about how does my well-being affect the well-being of people around us? How do all of our stories touch? And I think it's events like these that really make those kinds of conversations possible. And I'm so excited to learn from the other panelists today. I just realized I didn't have any of the time prompts open, so I don't know if I did okay, but thank you. This was, I feel very full from sharing this. I don't know that I've verbalized it to that many people yet, but I appreciate the space to do so, and I look forward to conversations.
Thank you, Leanne. And you are perfectly on time. Lovely. Actually, let me just back up. Leanne, I want to offer much gratitude for your weaving of vulnerability and courage and the layered and intersecting maps you are exploring. I have added many items to my reading list now. I'm excited to explore more. Thank you for sharing your experience of the legacy of the internment, and I could really hear the passion in your voice and the critique, which I deeply honor. I really want to highlight your efforts around storytelling as witness. I think there's something very powerful there, and I imagine people will have many questions for you when we get to the question and answer.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jotika Chaudhary Samant. Jotika is a queer glitter femme. Her ancestral lands are Fiji and India. She identifies as a racialized settler. Jotika is an interdisciplinary artist mobilizing a constellation of artistic endeavors, including visual art and song poetry, movement, writing, drama and zine making, and beyond. Jotika identifies as a chronically ill artist who centers BIPOC and QT-BIPOC, that is queer, trans, non-binary, Black, Indigenous, people of color, in her work and organizing. She has learned so much alongside the sick, the disabled, MAD, and Spoonie communities she is a part of. And so I will now turn the screen over to Jotika.
Hi, thank you so much. I have a double screen situation, so don't mind me if I look over here from time to time. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Sue, for that introduction, and thank you everyone for organizing and inviting me to this event. I'm gonna get to it. All I ever wanted was to write something, put some colors down, make things brighter, more beautiful, more bearable, safer, easier to stand in, something, anything to help me feel more alive. I was a child who spent a lot of time in my bedroom creating unique, colorful, and imaginative art. I used items that I found in the house and outside. I was a collector, and I still am. I created drawings, collages, paintings, projects made of yarn, and the list goes on. And I think this was to distract myself, to help me kind of move things out of my body, and probably disassociate to cope with what was going on. Here's some art that I made, I think when I was about 13. As a child, I had a lot of feelings and a lot of sensations in my body, and I often felt overwhelmed. I grew up in a lot of chaos with violence and addiction in my family, chaos inside my body and around the world around me. I was a highly sensitive, emotional girl who often got reprimanded for her tears, with sensations and feelings in my body when they were too overwhelming or confusing or painful. One thing I would turn to was art. Drawing, painting, writing, movement, singing, performance, music. I always had art projects on the go and parts of art projects strewn across the house, which I still do that. Connecting to my voice through my art. In my youth and into my early adulthood, my art became more about my personal narratives. I identified as an activist who wanted to create more social justice, and I became more politicized. And as I did, so did my art. The middle image here is, oh, did I share my screen? Are folks seeing my screen? No, you're not seeing my screen. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna do that right now. 1 second, share screen. Okay. I'm gonna go back for 1 second. Okay. Previous. So this is my art from when I was little. And the middle image here is my first zine I ever made. It was in 2012, and it was called Musings from My Heart, My Head, the Bus, and From Your Bed. And it was a collection of poetry, art, and writing that I put together. Art has really saved my life. It's given me a platform to create about my art and talk about all of which I've held shame for, silences that I've held tight in my family line, roots of it, to talk about the roots of intergenerational trauma and pain. Art's creation gave me a space to really start to understand, unravel, move so much of that was stuck inside of my body and stagnant. The next image are some more zines that I made. One is called Holding, Moving, Transforming Grief, and it helped me to process and understanding really complex grief that I had around my dad. And this zine really explores how do we explore grief when someone's still alive. The next one is called Conversations, and it's a zine that I made. I read through all of my teenage journals, and it's really about a conversation that I had with my younger self. And I also just put a lot of art in there that I made and writing I made when I was a teenager. And the next one is some art I'm just so proud of. It's my zine album. So I made a zine and I put an album in there. So I recorded my song poetry, and I have a CD that I put in there. And it also accompanied a performance, a show that I made with all the chapters of the zine. So it's a really interdisciplinary piece. The next part I want to talk about is organizing art spaces that center Cutie BIPOC. So this first image is, the orange poster is an event that I helped organize, and it was the first time that it centered, for me in my life, centering my queerness and my identity as a South Asian person. And I just remember this event was so special. It was so powerful. I sang for Hindi for the first time, and that I started crying on stage. Like, it just meant so much. There was no words to describe what that meant to have my queer community and my South Asianness just like connected. And the next image, I want to share this, the poster right at the top. Flourish was it's an arts fair that I've organized over the past few years. And this one was in 2018, and it was such a transformative market. I felt we had about 30 vendors, we had performances, and I just remember sitting there at my table while I was vending and just seeing everyone connecting and talking and laughing. And I got so much feedback from folks saying how this was such a space of connection and community building. And that's always my aim and hope when I'm creating art spaces. The next piece I want to share, is about my expressive arts therapy practice. So yeah, as an expressive art therapist, I do similar work. I create art spaces for folks. What's different is that I'm teaching about the nervous system. I'm talking about trauma, and I'm centering folks' experiences and their sensations and connecting to what gets held and stuck in our bodies. And I really aim to center my anti-oppressive values and help folks give context to their experience. These are 3 workshops that I've organized over the past year, and I'm hoping that they'll continue. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is I've done a lot of therapy in my life, and I've realized that healing does not happen. It's not going to happen in one way. We're undoing generations of violence and harm and pain and trauma. And For me, so many things have had to come together for me to be where I'm at on my healing journey. For me, it's like connecting to Hinduism in ways that aren't colonized, connecting to my identity as a witch, and connecting to nature in ways that are profound and magical, making and sharing my own art, moving my body, connecting to my sexuality and my sensuality, and releasing so much shame that gets held. Healing's not a linear process, and it takes time to figure out what works for us. And I think it takes a lot of integrity to heal. It's messy, and there's so many internal shifts that happen that no one ever sees, that we don't necessarily get credit for. They're not necessarily Instagrammable. It's a really internal process. And it's really important for us to find ways that work for us and center our own journeys and our own experiences and create our own paths to liberation. And I'm just gonna end with another song, just a piece of a song. Pain held tight in their body, how will it learn to move? How will they set it free? Pain held tight in their body, how will it learn to move? How will they set it free? How will it learn to move? How will they set it free? Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. And I will start my screen sharing. Sorry, this double screen is really throwing me off. Okay.
I understand completely, Jotika.
Thanks so much.
I can feel the resonance as I carry the tones of your song poem right here. I can feel it bumping up against some edges and some soft spots. And thank you for the reminder to center our own journeys and experiences. I'm in awe of the power of your arts practices. I was raised in the sciences, and art is something that just does not come easily to me. So I bow to your practices and really can see the power of them as you bring them together in therapy. And I wish we didn't have several provinces between us so I could send some clients your way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And so our final panelist for today. Oh, my heart feels so full already. Just let me take a pause for a moment and catch my breath. Our next panelist is River Blondin Burt, descended from mixed Dene, Gaelic, Nordic settler ancestries. River is a member of the Yellowknives Dene Nation, and please help me with this pronunciation, River. Ndilo? Ndilo, thank you. River is a creative consultant and multimodal performance artist. River's work is grounded in the exploration of healing through co-creation with earth and story. As River states, through a deepening relationship with the land body we call earth, they explore a regenerative art and creation praxis that allows me to move through myriad contemporary settler colonial social structures and ideologies with intent and curiosity. River is an artist and healer weaving performance, medicine, and meditations on what it means to be alive in this Anthropocene era. As I read poems on their website, Stories as Medicine, I could feel an internal landscape open. Rock forms shifted and moved inside of me into molten form. Honing their craft, River is a student of philosophy enrolled in Vancouver Island University, completing a bachelor's degree in philosophy and creative writing. River is also a land body connector and herbalist, Their work reminds us of our relations with bodies of humans, animals, plants, and the earth. They believe that the radical act of being in relation with our more than human relations is active political rebellion and a pathway for transformative social collective and personal healing. And now, River, the floor is yours.
Masicho, thank you so much, Sue, for that introduction. Leanne and Jotika, thank you so much for sharing and for opening us in such a good way. I'm aware that I tend to, saying this almost anecdotally, like I tend to keep my windows open because I like to feel the wind in my spaces. And it just started pouring overhead. So I'm actually feeling like it might be loud enough that you guys could hear some white noise potentially. I think that's very interesting because to me, that is the voice of rain and earth reminding us to cool down. Rain is always a very cleansing medicine and brings so much nourishment to the earth. You know, we hear about rainy days and it being a bad day, but I tend to sit with myself and think, you know, the plants are really happy right now. Earth is really happy right now, and the air will smell so sweet afterwards. So I don't think that's a bad day. Perspectives. So Masicho, thank you all for being here today. My name is River Cassandra Blondin Burt. My family, as Sue mentioned, is both Dane from Danendech, which is now called the Northwest Territories, as well as Scottish and Norwegian. So I come sitting at kind of like so many of us and like all of the other panelists today with an intersection of perspectives. This is vulnerable topics that we're working with, and I very much appreciated how Powell Street framed the ways that we were going to come in and share kind of each from our personal experiences. And I just wanted to reiterate that there are active listeners and people available for support. So if anything has been coming up or is coming up for you, then please reach out. They're there and we all care, and, you know, my heart's beating and pounding. And so this is a beautiful, vulnerable space to be together. I recently heard from one of my favorite authors, Bayo Akomolafe, that there are no safe spaces. And it really caught me off guard when he said that. But we're sitting in a circle of writers, of BIPOC writers kind of around the globe. And he said this, and he said it, and he said, there are no safe spaces. So please take exquisite care of yourself. And I thought that was just so beautiful. Exquisite care, exquisite care. This topic that we speak on today, art and mental health, to me feels so apropos to that statement, because art in its way that it is manifested in my life has very much taken the shape of a way for me to more deeply tune in to myself in a space that, like the other speakers here today, I think weaving my way through this world and my personal experience, learning how to take exquisite care of myself took acts of personal, social, and political rebellion. So this is an amazing group to be sitting with. I'm gonna share my screen now. Desperately want to hum to myself, you know. Here we go. Okay, so can you all see that? Yeah, beautiful. Creative entitlement. It doesn't mean behaving like a princess or acting as though the world owes you anything. Creative entitlement simply means believing that you are allowed to be here, and that merely by being here, you are allowed to have a voice and a vision of your own. The poet David Whyte calls the sense of creative entitlement the arrogance of belonging, and claims it is an absolutely vital privilege to cultivate if you wish to interact more vividly with life. Without it, you will never push yourself out of the suffering insulation of personal safety and into the frontiers of the beautiful and unexpected. I am speaking to you today on Love Letters to Divided Nations. This is a title that I have used for almost 5 years for various different things. It started as a series of poems that were love letters to the divided nations within myself. And through writing these letters, I started working my way towards a more cohesive understanding of what I now realize are just very complex, paradoxical situations that we all seem to be sharing. Through that, I also started exploring what I think that each of us has been talking about today, and that is something that I've been calling, along with, I think, many other people. I think this just sort of blossomed in the ether in a way over the last 2 years, but the trauma-informed art practice. This started with exploring trauma-informed relationships. And I realized very quickly that the first relationship that I had to really work with was my relationship to myself. And my art practice became the way that I maybe dove in more deeply. Ooh. So why the trauma-informed art practice? What is the trauma-informed art practice? And then Love Letters to Divided Nations. Now, I am both, I'm Virgo, and I'm going through a diagnosis for autism. So I just like order and framework, and I love tables of contents. And I put this in here because this was my thought process as I was approaching how I wanted to share with you today. And the delightful conversation I had with Sue really opened up for me a space to be able to hear more about Leanne and more about Jotika, and to really come into this place where I didn't actually feel like I needed to answer these questions so fully. I'm like, Leanne and Jotika, I totally creeped you online. And I didn't want to like double things up. And I'm not actually a trained professional. This is very much my own personal journey. So coming in and kind of being like, you know, who, what, where, when, why, didn't actually feel very appropriate. That is a conversation that we're all sharing. And I was really excited to sit with professionals and really sink more deeply as I recognize that my instincts towards this practice seem to have been confirmed in some very beautiful ways over the last few years with research that's coming out on new modalities of somatic practice, that kind of thing, or somatic therapies. But I'll get to that. So I'm going to go through a bit of each of these, but for the most part, I'm just going to be sharing with you my journey. So why the trauma-informed art practice? There is indeed a fire burning over the earth, taking with it plants and animals, cultures, language, ancient skills, and visionary wisdom. Culling this flame and reinventing the poetry of diversity is perhaps the most important challenge of our time. We sit in this era of the Anthropocene, and I started to realize a few years ago that so much of the mental health struggles that I thought I was sitting in were, like Leanne said, like Jotika reflected, so much an experience of me being an Indigenous Two-Spirit person in this world. There were so many ways that the natural being that I am did not fit into the containers that were offered to me. And what I realized even further was that the very natural response to that is kind of like to be pissed about it. But apparently the world doesn't like what they think is an angry little girl. And it became a very interesting conversation for me, maybe predominantly with myself and in my art, to explore what it meant to speak truth and what it meant to kind of sit with my own inner knowing and my own instincts and to honor those. And I'd say, you know, 7 or 8 years ago when I was like 22, 21, 18, like then it was just a lot of questions. It was so much wondering and passion and I think fury, confusion, and finding very few spaces to be able to express that in a safe way, in a loving way. But I don't really mean loving like cushy. I mean loving like where it was received with the understanding or the benefit of the doubt, where I could even hold space for it in a way that felt like I was giving myself a dignified space to explore. And it took me years to wind my way through what became a poetry practice, where I was finally able to give myself permission to tumble down some of these rabbit holes. Like Jotika, I feel you. Leanne, the work that you're doing, you know, sitting in groups and exploring some of this, there's so much that linear conversation cannot say. And Leanne, you spoke of Leanne Simpson, the other Leanne Simpson, and about language and the importance of language and how it, I think, frames whole perspectives in the world. And to me, English, maybe without any of my like grandmother's languages, English felt so limiting. Prose, to a certain extent, allowed me to break out of that linear trajectory a bit more. So I say why the trauma-informed art practice, because for the most part, this is not a time of simple social queries. To me, right now, what we are facing in North America, on Turtle Island, around the globe, are paradoxical. We live in systems that we wake up, I wake up and I turn my lights on. I've worked in and out of office jobs. Like, this is a system that a lot of us, in order to even be present in this meeting, are sitting with and operating with. And yet we are all, for the most part, critical of it to varying degrees. And what does it mean for our bodies to sit in the paradox, the cognitive dissonance of saying, no, not this, this is unsustainable, we can't go on, we know this is bad, and yet we have to live it out day after day after day. And to sit in that knowing, to sit in that reality, either with awareness and varying degrees of discomfort or numbness, means that the very voices of our generations are going to be struggling with the exact same limitations and silences that we all kind of feel. And that liberating these voices, allowing ourselves to speak into the discomfort, for me, represented in like these bigger emotions that I didn't know where they could safely go and be housed. That became the space that I recognized that having a trauma-informed art practice actually allows me to stay present in the here and now, to stay present in these real conversations, these really important nuanced topics that my body has in the past shut down to, as I've seen our communities shut down to. We've opened into them, we've explored them, and we also have places where we're still figuring out how to move forward. And so to me, the trauma-informed art practice becomes this beautiful synthesis of allowing art to be the true raw medicine of a society, not just performance, right? Not just entertainment, but truth spoken out in a beautiful, tangible, maybe comprehensible way to one person, to another, to varying groups. So why the trauma-informed art practice? Because it is important that we stay present in the here and now. And the more I am able to hold space for my own body, the more I can work through a process of allowing that out. And then I'd venture to say that as a performance artist, it also allows me a way of processing some of this. And I believe that there's a deep responsibility to performers to bring to the stage works that they have done some work with themselves. And that the stage and an audience are a space to be able to share experience with. But there's also something potent when you are doing that work yourself and you can gift the audience with the space holding that they need for them to hear what you have shared. So present in the here and now. Now, again, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because you've heard some amazing other panelists today, and I'm pretty sure that I too am rambling. But what is the trauma-informed art practice? Brene Brown says that we move from our heads to our hearts to our hands. Jotika said it, like you can't, there's so much in here that I feel like it takes doing something with it for it to land home in some ways. And so what the trauma-informed art practice is going to be different for everyone, right? I can't tell you that. And there are different therapies that we can access now. Both Leanne and Jotika spoke to a lot of body work and releasing, moving energy. So did Sue, actually. So I didn't really feel like this was the appropriate place for me to, like, what is the trauma? That's a very wide definition. But what it looks like to you and how you allow yourself to explore it is the most interesting conversation. And then Patrick Kavanaugh, see over there, created splendor, made by one individual, by things residual. Jotika, I too am a collector. I feel like I collect scraps of paper. I have this endless box of like memorabilia and little pamphlets and tickets and notes from like 10 years. And I started journaling because of one high school teacher like a decade ago. He was like, you don't have to write anything, just like put it in a picture. And I think that changed my life, right? So I started a journal practice through that, and my things residual became all of these little scraps that I put together. For me, my trauma-informed art practice has to do with shifting perspective. I learned maybe too late in life that there are a lot of great things that happen when you shift the conversation around trauma and the ways it manifests from what is wrong to you to what happened. This is a conversation I continue having with myself and what happened, and understanding these layers and opening up to the world around us and understanding context. Creation stories in the apocalypse is a big thing for me right now. Sue, how do we move forward? What do we do? You kind of asking this question. And for me, you know, each of the panelists here, Leanne and Jotika, is approaching this with this beautiful, iterative, emergent process that artists across the globe are doing, and politicians and community workers and organizers. And that's where we are, I believe, creating our new creation stories. Western society has a tendency to lean, I think, too heavily on its apocalypse narratives. You're going to stress until the deadline and then homework's due. But we're here, and everything that I've learned from my Dana ancestry is that when times are tough, it is not fear that will get us out alive. And that although there are many narratives that are put out to children, you know, to warn from going into the woods, say, after dark, that what we are taught most is hope and is innovation. And so what does it mean to be in the here and now and to create new narratives for ourselves? You heard me talk a little bit about this at the beginning, but Love Letters to Divided Nations started as love letters to my divided nations. And there's so much that I think is being beautifully unearthed around attachment theory, as it just connects with, for me as an Indigenous person, so much to my community, so much to my experience, and my lived experience, and the experience I see in my community around me. And so art, to me, became this place where I could start to fundamentally begin to rebuild an attachment with myself. And that is a very humbling and startling journey, because there's nobody I rebel against more. Love Letters to Divided Nations. So my final piece here is to share with you a little bit about a piece I'm in development with right now. And the only reason I kind of share it, I guess there's multiple reasons, is one, that this actually came to fruition in a residency that I just did in Vancouver at Morrow Gallery. You can kind of see it in one of the pictures there, with Zine Kwan and Dumb Instrument Dance, and in partnership with Powell Street Festival. So I am really shy to say this, because it's a different thing to be sitting here as an artist, kind of sharing pieces that feel either completed or validated in some sort of public space. But I share this very specifically because, as you can see in the list here, Love Letters to Divided Nations did not start as some big concept of an art piece. It started as a final paper for a class I didn't even finish, became poems that I wrote over 2 or 3 years, because I realized that one class kind of broke me, and that I needed years to be able to figure out how to synthesize the ideas that I had been presented there together. Political theory 431 was about understanding the importance of citizen-centered democracy and civic movements. And every narrative that I was given as an assumed woman, as an Indigenous person, as a young person, was that of not taking up space, not making demands. And that's kind of hard to say, because we're sitting in a group of very progressive ideology here. It's almost hard to admit, to think back to a kind of mentality that I could have been in where there was any other thought. But I'm here to say that looking on election day coming up here in Canada, I'm now 32. And at 18, I remember saying to a friend of mine, oh, no, you don't want me voting, because I don't actually know enough to be able to make an educated vote. And while there might have been some responsible truth in that, the reality is that the sad fact of a young future citizen thinking that in anything from their community to their family to their governing system is a sad fact. And the journey that I've taken since has been a very glad one, understanding that so much of the social privilege, the political privilege that I hold to be sitting here today and to be doing these things is because it is when people like Leanne and Jotika and Sue and myself do this work that more space is held for the brilliant minds that can create new futures that have yet to be dreamed of. And there's so much potency in that. If I can come from a failed class and poems as a mad writer, I love that phrasing, and then come into a space where this work is being held and is holding me, like this is paying a lot of my bills right now. This is more than just healing. This is practical, and this is a life that has been born out of not even believing in myself, but just keeping going. And hearing teachers or individuals like Leanne and Jotika do this work, and to know that we're not alone is kind of what keeps me going. Thomas King said the truth about stories is that is all we are. And you know, there are so many friends and community members and partners and people who have cared about me and loved me and also completely not understood where the heck I'm coming from. Like, I would say more family members and community members were like downtrodden on me than anything, and not intentionally. They don't even mean to do it. They're just like, are you sure? Like, I don't know, my bad. Can you repeat yourself? And like, at the end of the day, I wanted to put this up here because for what it's worth, there have been times in my life where authors like these were the stories that allowed me to continue to maintain my own truth and to hold on to that subjective truth just long enough to continue creating. Whether it's Elizabeth Gilbert, who's talking about, and I mean, like half of these are white ladies. Like, I'm startled with myself, but here I am. And I'm humbled enough to say that these really are some of the aunties that got me through. And so when I say, what is your trauma-informed art practice? What are the things that allow you to sink more deeply and just be in that space with yourself? That is potent medicine for the world right now. And if you have any questions, if you'd like a screenshot of the audiobooks, then feel free to connect. Thank you so much for being here today. I probably went way over time, but we're about to go into conversation, so I hope that's not terrible.
Thank you so much for bringing us home, River. You made a comment about professionals. Earlier today, I was sitting with a room full of probably about 35 professional therapists who all spoke about the power of presence in healing. And it really isn't about the professional title and knowledge. And wow, River, Leanne, Jotika, your presence and your healing powers are vast. So thank you for that. Thank you for reminding us, Leanne, about stories as witness to ourselves. Jotika, for reminding us to center our own journeys. And River, for sharing with us this notion of creative entitlement and the arrogance of attachment to self. I can feel my spine get taller as each of you spoke. Thank you for talking about the shared paradoxes and complexities that we all sit with as we gather in this cyberspace today on Saturday. And with that, I'd like to open the space for the breakout rooms. So soon we're going to be teleported through cyberspace into our breakout rooms, where Powell Street Festival Society trained facilitator is going to guide you through the Dokana, the what if process of creating generative questions as we come together in conversation with each other. In this space, we invite you to share your ideas, your questions, and to respectfully hold space and witness the questions and experiences of the others. And in this space, we invite all of us to grow more comfortable with silences, the fullness of silences. And so as we journey into our breakout rooms, we also invite you to take a bio break if you quickly need one. And then after the breakout rooms, we'll gather back here for us all to reunite again. Thank you so much to our three panelists, to Jotika, Leanne, and River. Oh, my heart and my soul are full. I can only imagine what's going to happen in the breakout rooms. We'll see you soon.
Thank you to, nope. Okay, recording starting. Great, so first of all, thank you to my group, Akira, Julie, and Nan. We had a great discussion and we have two Dokana questions we weren't able to narrow down. So first is, does community pride equal personal pride and sense of belonging? And the other question is, how do structures of power separate us through art?
Hello, everyone. I was in breakout number 2. I want to thank Diana, Akira, and Laura for being in our group. And we didn't have time to narrow it down to one question. So we have quite a few, but I'd like to share two similar to Eddie. And these are, how do we make what we withhold manifest into our interactions, writing, and what we say? And the other one is, when we do not have the knowledge ourselves, how do we help someone we want to help? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We were group 3, and I want to thank Alexa and Kayla who are in the group with me. And our question is, how can we connect around the things we cannot speak about or we are not supposed to speak about?
Hi, everyone. Thanks to my group, we had some lovely discussion. I will also be sharing 2 questions. So first of all, what happens if the language of a culture doesn't have the words or means of understanding mental health? And secondly, is our understanding of mental health and well-being different in different languages?
Hey, I was in a group with me, Sue, Linda, Janice, and Sharon. Our questions kind of all circled around how do our shared experiences and stories fit together to help us feel safe?
Hello, sorry. I wasn't sure how the spotlight worked. Thank you so much to our group. It was so rich and generative. We had River and Jotika and Kyle and Carrie in my group. And so we have one question, but it's actually a series of questions, which is classic with these types of questions. So our first, sorry, no, just the whole thing. I'm just going to say it all. How do we transform bystander politics to empower collective change and collective mobilization to create the society we want, which is an embodied society? And how do we move beyond the individual to mobilize collective responsibility and create inroads to action? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Oh, Hi, everyone. It was my first time facilitating today and it went really well. I'd like to thank Sharon, Mary, and Leanne and Emiko for making it such a good time. At the very last second, we kind of decided to fuse two questions together and that making one question. And that question was, what physical blockages are in our body and how do we acknowledge them? Oh, did I get that correct? I might have. I think we did. Okay. That was all.
Hello. So if I'm being spotlighted, that means it's time for closing remarks. Oh, I don't know how you're all feeling, but I'm feeling quite full. Thank you all for holding space with us in such a generous, engaged way. Thank you to the panelists for your inspiring sharing. The depth of your wisdom, your knowledge, your ability to be vulnerable and to take risks. Thank you to all of the audience members for engaging in the Dokana and helping us to kind of think more broadly and more generatively about how we might move forward in this process. So we are beautifully on time. And so just an announcement for the next date of the Paueru Gai Dialogue number 8. It will be on October 16th at the same time and same day of Saturday. The topic is expanding diasporic imaginaries, building relations across communities. And I can see how we'll just kind of roll from today and into expanding the conversation even further. So for the next while, maybe if we could invite all of you, if you'd like to stay around, and this is just the informal community chat. I'm sure there are more conversations and sharings to be had. So I'll be around for the next hour, as will all of the Powell Street Festival Society folks, and we look forward to chatting with you more.